We are getting to be pros and just want to welcome everybody to our mini CEE. We started off having some creativity expert exchange conferences because nobody wanted to leave after they graduated and everybody wanted to be able to connect. And now we are global. The world of creativity is much bigger than just us and just our alumni. So we're really excited to have alumni come back, and we're excited to have those of others of you globally who are as interested in creativity and devoted to the studies as we are. So thank you for coming. And I want to introduce our two presenters. So we'll go to the second slide. You can read a little bit of them there. That's kind of the official one. And I love that Ellen has on the back her book on that shelf. But I want to just talk from my perspective because I've known the two of them for quite a long time. And they are wonderful people. And I know of their expertise. So I'm really glad that they decided to do this for us. So Helene and Hector, both alumni, Masters of Science in Creativity and Change Leadership, both experts, facilitators, trainers. Hector, ed psychology background as creativity, and Ellen, business background, but yet expertise, both of them in many areas. So Hector just got out of a freshman class at the university, teaching creativity, of course, and psych and gifted. And so he came in a little frazzled, as freshmen will do to you, and also has a class tonight. And Ellen is a consultant and a trainer as well. They're both very skilled presenters. So they bring together innovative thinking into action. They bring a global perspective to creativity and change leadership. So welcome to the two of you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue. This is a new format, and we are excited to have a conversation about this. But basically, I'm going to be interviewing Helen, and she will be sharing her expertise on design thinking with us. So, Helen, how did you become interested in design thinking?
Yeah, so it's actually all started at Buffalo, like everything in our lives, isn't it? So I was in Buffalo, and the end after my first year was looking for a project, and I was the only person in the West Coast in California, and I was like, how do I know what's happening in this community? And so I somebody mentioned the D school. I never heard of it. It was really small at the time. And I'm like, this is really interesting. What's happening? It's at Stanford. So I just call and say, hey, I want to know everything about design thinking. Can I take a class? And they're like, well, you can't really take a class, but we have auditors. So if you want to come and audit a class, feel free. And so I end up actually auditing every single class in the design thinking bootcamp for 6 weeks. I was the only one coming every 3 times a day. And I learned a lot about design thinking, and I really was intrigued about how you can combine design thinking and foresight or creative problem solving at the time. And since then, that's what I've been doing in my practice.
So, we wanted to do is to ask the audience to write on the chat if you are familiar with design thinking, just write one. But if you are not familiar, write zero, and then we can get an idea of who is familiar with this or not.
So how are we doing here?
So five people out of everybody are not familiar, but the rest are.
Yep,
Okay.
got about 10.
So
Very
yeah.
nice. Perfect. So it's good to know. One of the things, actually, it's a principle of design thinking is know your users, know your audience in this case. So it is
Yes.
helpful to know how much in depth I can go or not. So thank you for the question.
All right. So what are the key stages of the design thinking process?
Okay. So I'll be glad to talk a little bit about it. And I like this definition. I like to go back to it because it's kind of helpful to look at the big picture. and thinking about what is design thinking. And this is for my deal, but it is saying the intersection of three things. The human-centered, so it had to be desirable. So you have to understand your user. You have to make something that they want. The second part is the technology, which doesn't have to be technology as we understand, but it has to have something that works for them. And then the third thing is a business. So if it's a business product, it has to be viable. But if it's a nonprofit or in education, there is always a business aspect to it. You always have finance associated with things, and it has to work. So thinking about the three elements, it's always kind of a good definition to keep in mind as we build anything new. Because for me, design thinking, yes, it applies to product, but it also applies to services, to experience, to anything. And as we build something new, we want to be sure that we think about who we're doing that for, the mechanic of what the changes is, and then is that going to be sustainable? So to answer your question about the model, there's a lot of model. The G School has several models, but this one is one of the teaching models, which I like because it kind of has great parallel with foresight, and yet it kind of has slightly different emphasis. So I find it really useful. So on the front end, instead of clarifying, they have two buckets. The first one is empathize, and the second one is define. So the empathize really when part of understanding a problem is really understanding the users, understanding where they're coming from, understanding their frustration, their pain point, understanding their lives and how what is happening for them. And then the define is what problem do we need to solve, but also what are the criteria, what are the pain points, and so be clear. The step 3 is ideate. This one is pretty similar to foresight, of course. And then the next two is what we call in foresight development, and what it has a slightly different emphasis because it talks about two elements: the prototyping, which is how can we make those ideas in a format that we can communicate and then test. And it doesn't have, if it's a product, we know prototype as product, so that's more obvious, but it could be it could be a flow chart, it could be a skit, it could be something else, but a format that we get out of words and people's head, and we have something that we can share. And when we can share, we communicate, and then we can get feedback. And the idea is to get feedback really early on. So, and then the part that is not included, which we have in foresight, is implementation, which obviously come after we've done that. And there is also, as in foresight, an iterative nature to it. Some of the other models have a bunch of circle back and forth. This one doesn't, but that's their approach.
So
And
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you, how is design thinking similar or different from CPS and foresight?
So
Mhm.
go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, for instance, refining the ideas. Where would you find that in design thinking?
So that would really be in the prototype testing kind of circle. So to refine those ideas, we say we make those ideas into solutions. And in design thinking, they're more specific about it. Not that it would not happen under foresight, it could, but they're very explicit that we want to create prototypes. So something that look like your idea, but in a more than words. I say in a more concrete way. And then the benefit of that is that you can test. So you can show it to people. And instead of being just words, like people can see, it can be just a drawing, it can be a 3D prototype, it could be a flow chart of how this new reorg could look like. It could be something like that, something that is concrete that people can react to. And I think, my background before that was marketing research. So I really think that having this testing and prototyping kind of part of it in development is a really important part, and can really, especially in applying innovation, speed up the feedback, speed up the outcome, and also save a lot of time and money. Because instead of trying to build something that is perfect and implement, early on when it's cheap and fast, we can start getting feedback. And if 5 people, and it doesn't need a lot of people, if 5 people you have, I don't know, a new website, and you show a picture of your homepage and people don't understand what's happening, that's enough to know that you need to change. So it can really be really, and it's a really an iteration part, prototype, test several times to get to better. And then you can start getting toward implementation or market implementation or thing like that.
So I'm just trying to make a comment here regarding empathize and prototype. It seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that a bit of the data gathering is getting to know what you want to solve for your clientele, and then you do that through research. You go into this a bit later on, but you are prototyping. You're trying to test your main assumptions through the whole process to make sure that you are dealing with the things you assume at the beginning you are dealing with. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct because at the core of design thinking is the idea of being user-centered. So the user
Yes.
everywhere. So they at
Mhm.
the beginning, when we don't even know exactly what we want to solve, and instead of just being in our head, is like, okay, let's go out and observe what they're doing in their life, observe what they're doing in their work, get interview with people, get those questions so we really understand the challenge from their perspective. And then when you move along the line, and you can also, have users in the ideation, but definitely the prototyping testing, same thing again. So at the beginning, it's like having users at every step of the process as much as possible, to be sure that we are just not, biases, and we really think about who is this going to apply. And one thing that is really important is sometimes people understand users as end users. So it's easy if you have a product, like who is going to buy the product. But I think what's important to understand is that the users are multiple. In a way we talk about it in foresight is stakeholders. So people, when we create change, whether it's to create a product, whether it's an internal change, any change, there's a lot of function, role, and people that are going to be affected by this change. And talking to users means talking to all those users, not only the end users. If you have a product, talk about the retailers, talk about internally or manufacturing team or research and development team or partners. Because if we don't do that up front, then we develop this great solution and then something is missing. And we realize, hey, we have this great product problem. It costs 20 million to manufacture. Or we have this great solution, but people are hating. Some people that actually need to make it happen hate it or don't want to do it, or it's going to be too cumbersome. So that's the idea, is really that having users all users all along, so you can really do the creative problem solving with them in mind.
Do you have any example any story you'd like to share with us about how this has you have used it in practice?
So I can give you this example. I had this client that was a small company, and they were not they had really they were in fashion, and they had challenges as a lot of what they were launching was not working. And so what I did is actually a combination of, I combined both worlds. For me, they're the same, but I did a foresight. We did foresight, and we saw the profile of the team. And what the profile of the team was showing is that there is one founder, small company, was a visionary, has a preference for ideation, coming up with all the ideas. And then the team preference was implementing, getting things done. And then the other founder was the only one that was a clarifier and trying to ask questions, and nobody was actually really paying much attention because they were the only one. And when we look, so that was kind of the team dynamic. And then when we look at the process and what we're doing, they were not spending time on the development phase, and not necessarily enough time on the customer phase at the beginning. So we had them talking to the users more to start when their process, and then developing some clear tools and steps so they would do development. So it involves, they had those ideas, get some drawings of what the new fashion idea was, and then we had them like in a workshop, a 3-day workshop. On day 3, they were on Zoom calling people, showing them their ideas, their drawings. They were sometimes had samples of the thing and getting reaction right away. And then, after 2 or 3 people say, this makes no sense, try something new and keep doing it. So that was a part when, that prototyping testing loop that we built into a workshop to create new products and services, and really help them understand that that was really important and they need to spend more time in development. And those were great for them. That was really great tool for development to use that prototyping testing approach.
Thank you. Yeah, I always love stories because it helps people to understand and make some and remember. So I wanted to ask you, how are the tools used in design thinking similar or different than other approaches?
So, I mean, tools are only tools. I'm just going to say that because I think what's more important is understanding the process. This chart has a few that they use, and I'm just talking about a few that I think are interesting as complementary tools to the one we use in CPS. There is, books with hundreds of tools, so there is much more than that. But I'm going to talk about a couple that I think are more important. I'll go into details, but just to go phase by phase, in the empathize is really tools around ethnographic research. And then in the define is really understanding the pain point with the customers that are different. Ideation, I mean, we have plenty and we do that great. And then the prototyping is the idea of mock-up, storyboard, anything that can represent it. And then testing, which is not something that traditionally we've been talking so much with foresight, is how do we test? And a lot of it at this stage is really qualitative. This is not quantitative. It's just get something and it's really testing to learn. It's not to quantify. It's not to know, okay, we're going to make 10 million of these ideas, but really to learn. So if that makes sense to my customers, if that makes sense in their universe where they're coming from, if that doesn't, how can we articulate things better? So I can go a little bit more in detail since this audience knows a lot of design thinking. Is that okay?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I think one of the elements that I think is really core to design thinking, and I think something that we can talk about. Actually, I had a talk when we did a CEE conference and we did those talks a few years back. I had a talk about ethnographic research. That was my talk. I'm sure we can dig it somewhere. But the idea is that really, how can we understand the users and doing it from a human perspective? So see things from their perspective, which means understanding where they come from and what they're doing, but also how they're feeling. Really important. And really be open. It's an activity that requires listening, open-ended question, and really understanding in the real universe. That's why it's called ethnographic research. It's not necessarily I put people in a room like they used to do the focus group. That is not ethnographic research, but doing it with people in their environment, whether it's at work, it's in their store, in their home, and really understand how does those ideas fit into the broader context of the objects, the behavior, the family dynamics and all of that. And it is really powerful. People are always sometimes afraid of it because it feels like it's a big word. Or like, I'm not trained for ethnographic research. So when I work with group, I'm just saying, you know what? Homework before we work on a challenge is go and talk to one of your customers, one of your users, ask 5 or 6 open-end questions, just listen. How is your day? What's your biggest challenge? Where are you frustrated? Show us how you do something. Simple question like that that really get us into the universe. And every time I ask people to do it, they're just amazed how much they can learn in just like 1 or 2 discussion and observation with people, and with that mindset of being open and just trying to learn as much as possible the context around whatever we're trying to focus on and change. And there are 3 approaches. The first one is immersion. So if it's about how is it to shop for a new iPhone, then you actually go and shop and see how it is to buy a new iPhone. So you put yourself in those shoes, and that's a great way to understand an experience. The second one is more observing. So you can observe people buying something, doing something in their office, whatever it is, and just kind of notice of what's happening, what's the flow. And then the third one is interview, when you actually ask question. And often it's really good if you can mix both of them, because in an interview, people will think what they think they're doing. But when you observe, like, oh, you said this is really easy, but I saw you on your screen and you had to do 5 steps to get to this result. Oh yeah, well, I've been doing it for 5 years. I don't even think about it, but it's still a cumbersome, it's a pain point. So if you can have the observation and the interview, then it's really interesting because you can ask people what's happening, why they're doing that on something that we're not able to even think about because they don't know what they're doing. A lot of time we don't know what we're doing. And when we when we speak, we tend to rationalize things. So having the observation in addition can be really powerful.
People have got used to the pain points, in other words. People get used to them, and then when you're observing, you can help them become aware.
And they don't even think it's pain because they don't know it could be done differently or better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, when we didn't have AI, we do Google search and it was fine. Now we have AI and like, okay, well, I do a search with it because it's easier. But we didn't know what we didn't know. So talking about pain point, this is another tool that is useful. It's called the empathy map. When you based on this ethnographic research, you're trying to kind of put the elements into different buckets. So the task, what people were trying to do, what question they needed to understand, and then the feeling associated with it. Oh, that was great, that's frustrated. Sometimes they give you the words, sometimes you can see it, struggling with doing something or being really happy with the result or something like that. Influence, what had an influence in what they did, the people, the place, the environment, and all of that. And then the pain point, what was difficult, what was challenging. And that's really helpful to kind of understand things better because what we're trying to do, I mean, design thinking is really try to identify those gaps and those pain points that would create a problem that is worth solving for your users. So that's why it's an interesting tool. The third one I wanted to mention is a customer journey map. Is really thinking about a customer, or it could be a group of customers going through, talking about buying an iPhone or here buying a car and what it takes. And then you'll notice there is some part that are easy and clear, and there's some part that might be hard, or there's some part that are unclear, or there's some part when people don't know what to do. Okay, I get this new iPhone, but how do I set it up? Or my car is like, how do I get the insurance paper done or something? And those are pain points. So once again, if you can identify what works and what doesn't work, that can really help solve some issue and getting to better solutions. And then on the other side of it, and we can talk about it a little bit more, is the idea of prototyping. And as I was mentioning, there's a lot of way to prototype. And my challenge to anybody is you can always prototype. There's always a way to prototype. You might be to be very creative about what prototypes mean, but prototype means get off the words and find some representation that can then be shared and get feedback about.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about also how can design thinking help solve business problems, complex business problems, and innovate? Now, within that question, we can use this question, which is how can empathy and user-centric approaches in design thinking, how can it lead to better business outcomes?
Yeah, so I think, design thinking is a great approach as CPS for problems that are not, those fuzzy problems, the wicked problem. I don't know if you're familiar with the term,
Yeah.
which is the problem that you solve it and then we create something else. It's not easy. It's not like, okay. And usually we don't know how to solve it because we haven't done it before, because otherwise we don't need either of those. So, I mean, it is powerful because it starts with really everything's possible. When you start with your users, everything's possible. You don't even know, you might not have no idea what you want to try to solve. I mean, you can do it broadly or more narrowly, but you can start with, it's great when you want to redefine the categories and say, hey, I just want to change the experience for doing, I don't know, shopping or whatever. So it can be nice on something that is very unclear. And then you start with your users and give you information and then pain point, and then you get to a problem and you get somewhere. So that can be really, really powerful. And what was the other part of the question?
About the better business outcomes. This is a generic question.
Yeah.
But
And I think the better business outcome is because you have the users. And so whatever you come up with, we're going to at least have some meaning for the customers. I mean, I work with a lot of product managers, for example, a lot of them from engineering. And engineers tend to solve problems with features. But features might not be really something that it's exciting because it's like, oh, and you see sometimes things that are over-engineered and you have 10 features on these things and it's all exciting for the person that designed it, but for the person that use it, it actually bring complexity. Some features slow down the process. Some things make me like, it's so complex, I won't even touch this. I mean, every time, and so that's why it's helpful is having users all along. It gives you it ensure you that whatever the outcome is something that people want, is going to be useful to them, and they can use it, and it's relevant, and ideally it's delightful to them.
Yeah, it just made me think about the interesting thing about design thinking is that you can find new markets, because if you are observing 3 people or 10 people is one thing, but if you're observing 100 people and you have a team of people doing research, you're not going to find maybe that everybody's the same. You have 30% of the people having certain preferences or pain points or gain points, and another 30% of the people finding you find some of the stuff, which means that it's creating some sort of competitive advantage in terms of finding the unique needs of certain groups of people that other industries or other competitors do not know about. So I was going to ask you if you have had that type of experience in terms of giving, when we're talking about these better business outcomes. A better business outcome is to design for different groups of people.
Yeah, and I think, one of the interesting concepts in design thinking, and I might be fully addressing your question, but is the concept of extreme users.
Mhm.
Like in traditional, even market research and approach, we want to do the average users, used to be the mom 20 to 40 with 3 kids. But the reality is that gives you a product that is blah, and is going to, by trying to address everybody, you actually address nobody. And so there is this concept in design thinking, which I think is really powerful, is designing for the extreme. So design for the people that use this kind of thing all the time, design for the people that never use it and don't want to use it, and how would it look like? And it probably would like very different, and it will have some edge and interesting elements. And then you realize that even if you design for the extreme, as you move toward market and things like that, things get less and a little less edgy, and then it might actually be appealing to non-extreme people because it's been designed in a very interesting way. I mean, interesting example is the OXO brand of kitchen and other things. Originally was designed by a husband for his wife who had arthritis. So a lot of things around cooking was really hard to do. And so thinking about ergonomic for the people that have arthritis, you have designed really great product for actually everybody. Because now I like the peeler much better than a regular peeler, even if, arthritis is not my issue. So those ideas, I think, is really important. And as to your point, as we talk to customers, you want to talk to a lot of different customers and not the average customers, because those are the people that are interesting. The extreme users, you learn a lot because usually they will do things above and beyond that you wouldn't, they use this product that way. That's crazy because, and then you can learn a lot and say, maybe there's something that other people could use or could do if they knew about it. So that can be really useful.
Thank you. So what role does prototyping and testing play in the design thinking process for business innovation?
Well, I think it's critical. I think one thing that happened in business is there is this idea that we want to be perfect and know everything. And so if you look at timeline, traditional business, they were like, and even people in the company, I want to do this thing and I want to do it so it's so perfect before I show it to this manager and before I test it and things like that. And you actually end up losing a lot of time and money. And the idea of testing prototyping early and fast is actually great because you can see, am I in the ballpark at this? Is there some resonance? And if they're not, is there something fundamentally wrong that can fix? Or I can decide I drop it. Because one of the big challenges in innovation is when do you innovate and when you don't innovate? When is it a good idea and when it's not a good idea? And so you want to give ideas a chance, and that's where prototyping helpful because you can do it early and quickly before it's too much in the system and it's going to be pushed back. And you also want to have a decision point when you say this is not going, there is a point is like this is not working. Customers are confused about it. Let's stop it. And so having that prototyping, testing early, cheaply, fastly can help both and pushing ideas that are a little out of the box, but we can see, you know what, but there is really something interesting with how the customer react, and deciding that those ideas are not worth pushing because yeah, they look great on paper, but the reality is nobody really wants it. So I really believe that that is helpful, and it's sometimes hard to do because big organizations have big process, and the process gets so formalized, and you have to do so many things that you kind of miss our flexibility. So sometimes, that's why when I talk to clients, I really encourage them like, what can you do that is kind of under the radar screen quickly within your budget, and at least you have more information and you have stories. That's the other thing you were talking about, storytelling. That's a really important part in design thinking. And then you can have stories. You know what? We had this thing and I put it to 4 people, and guess what they did? It was they loved it. They really loved it. And there's something to this that might not be a number, but if people get really excited about something, that doesn't happen that often. You might be on something. So that step prototyping testing early, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it's interesting to get people in an experience. And prototyping is to get people to experience the value of what you're doing. And if you're trying to persuade people, an experience will persuade sometimes more than just numbers or sketches on a piece of paper.
Exactly.
So moving on, I wanted to ask you about how innovation teams. How can an organization support and sustain innovation teams?
Yes. So thank you for asking. Let me just in 1 second because I need to share this back, and just want to be sure that you are you seeing the presentation? You we good?
Yes, but if you can change the screen because we see.
Yes. Yes. I'm getting there.
Mhm.
Okay. So talking about the teams and the innovation teams, which is been kind of the focus because I work mostly on innovation projects. A lot of those could apply to team in general, but what I found is what I call the 5 principles for those teams. The first one is, and a lot of them are based on foresight, but some of them are also using design thinking approaches, and then my knowledge in innovation. You want to build the right team, very important. You want to be clear about the process. You want to be user-centered. The fourth thing that I find is actually really important is be ready to fail, because we're all talking about success, but the reality of innovation and change is that you're going to fail. And if you kind of know that there'll be failure as part of the success, then you'll have a different mindset and a different approach. And then the last one that is really important in the culture of the company. So on the first one, the right team, as we know, we work better with teams that bring multiple perspectives. That mean diversity from their background, their role, their jobs, which is usually why people are put in a team. They put because we want an engineer and we want a marketing person, and then we want a sales guy and a finance person, but that might not make them great at innovation team because they might not know about it. The experience and then how they think. Um, and ultimately, it's really important is breaking the silos. In corporate, there's a lot of silo thinking. We talk to people in our department. We talk to the other engineers that are working with us, or we talk to people that have the same function, same experience, or similar background. Also, the people like me. It's easier to get along. We know that with people like me or my peers, share identity and family community. But when and they're all great because they're all part of who we are. But what we want to do is have a team that bring all those different perspectives. So then we can really see the challenge and solve it, bringing those multiple perspectives. And the other thing, and that's something that obviously we know how to do, is it's important to make diversity of thinking visible. Imagine if you had all those people in a room, that might not go so well. But luckily, I really think that foresight is a great tool for that, to really help. And I try to use it as a grounding for my work when I work with team and on innovation projects. Is first, we need to understand how we work together and how that diversity is both useful, but also can be challenging. And most of you know about this. The second part is being clear about the process. We all know about this. one thing I learned is while I really believe in design thinking and foresight as the process, I also work with clients that have other processes, lean thinking or agile. And what I found the best way is not to come and say, forget your process, use this one, but say what elements of design thinking and foresight can I bring to the process that is already in place, because it's much easier for people to add to a process than reject a process. It doesn't work in organizations so much. But there is some principle and ideas that are really powerful, or tools that you can bring within an existing process. Having trained team members, as you know, at least some familiarity. And that's something I found is sometimes people are put on the team, but they come from different organizations, or this organization doesn't even have a clear process. And so whatever it is, it's more important to have a shared process that people understand than which process is selected. And then, of course, you can bring tool to this. And then ideally train facilitators with time and ability to focus. Sometimes they do it internally and we don't, but if they do, we know it works better. The third part, and we talked about it, is being user-centered. And I love this metaphor that Tom Kelly used in his book, The Art of Innovation. He say, if you're not in the jungles, you're not going to see the tiger. So encourage your clients themselves. In big organization, there is a marketing research department that do the research and things like that. But you need to do your own research. Qualitative, you need to talk to your own customers. You need to go and observe. If it's a software, people may be willing to share your screen and see and show you how they use your software in action. If it's in a store, go to the store, whatever it is, but go in the jungle and see what happened. Talk to people in the real environment. Very important. And as mentioned before, it's really thinking about all the users that are going to be affected by the change, because ultimately innovation is about change. And it could be something that is only internal. So we have to think about the other department, the other function, the employees, the management, the stakeholders. And then if it's more outside focus or mixed, we also need to have the client, the end users, the retailer, the sales, the partner, intermediaries, and all of the above. So thinking really broadly about who should we talk to, understand, and understand how is the change that we're going to create is going to impact them. And then part of it is also we talked about it, the prototype early and often, and there's always a way to find ways to prototype. And if you have a challenge, I'd be glad to help you ideate about ways to prototype, whatever your challenge is. The other one is failure. The other day I did a search on the internet for visual for failure, and they're all very sad people, crying people, pulling their hair and all of that. But the reality is when you innovate and change, there'll be failure somewhere along the way. In new products, 75 to 90% of them fail. So it's better to assume that you will likely to fail. Doesn't mean you can't get to the outcome, but failure or not being like exactly what you want at the time you want will happen. And if you can embrace it, then one, you can create, sorry? There's a question? No. Okay. You can create the right expectation within the organization, the team, the leadership. You can make failure an opportunity to learn. So that's really change the world, change the concept. It's not bad, especially if it's early on, like prototyping. Like people didn't like our prototype. Great. We learned something. We learned why they didn't like it. We learned that what's missing and we can make it better. And then do it early, because then you save a lot of money, because it's easier to do it. We have done some prototype that cost us $100. We spent we had 20 customer interview on Zoom for whatever, and we have great information and we can do it again, rather than we have this great test that costs half $500,000 or even $100,000. And then it's like, okay. And we spend a year and a team working on this idea. So do it early is really important. And then the last piece, is the culture. And sometimes, I think the killer question is what happens when the team fail. If you want to create change, you need to have an organization that can absorb within some parameters and constraints. I mean, we don't want people to lose billions of dollars, but build failure. And when the team fail is actually, okay, what can we learn? We support them. We don't put the issue under the rug, but we kind of learn from it, debrief, and get to the next thing. So that's really important. And having a system to support that. So encouraging risk-taking and experimentation within some constraint. It could be like, you have 2 months to do this, and this is how much budget you have, and you have 2 people to start with, and then we'll see. You can promote communication about what may happen, and then understand the unique need of an innovation team. It's a different team. It's often important to have a champion that can kind of protect the team against like what's happening. You haven't done anything in 5 days, all those things. It's like, give them we'll get back to you, but give us a little freedom for a little while, and then protect the team when that is needed. So my last
Thank
thing.
you. So,
My
okay,
last
yep.
kind of my and it's an homage to the equation from Nolle's equation, but I create the performance team equation, and I think this is what I'm seeing, that the performance team need diversity and diversity of thinking. You need a common process and share tools. You need a supportive climate to really help and support a performance team. So that's my equation.
Thank you. Would you like to share one real world example where design thinking has led you to groundbreaking creative problem solving?
Well, I guess the example that I gave before was a client, and it was interesting because one of the challenge when you work on a consultant who is big organization is really hard to see the impact. When you work with a small organization, you can actually train everybody and see the impact. So the fact that, for this organization, we create that new process. We had a team that understand that you couldn't go from ideation to implementation without spending time on the development phase. And really, that is something that really helped with, well, we fail less because instead of throwing everything at the wall and see what stick, which was kind of what it was, like, oh, this is an idea, let's try it with our customers. And they had a lot of costs and stuff. We can kind of decide which one we should actually go into production and ship. And it was, production in China. So there's a lot of logistic associated with it. So that made it much easier for them.
The thing about sometimes the changes that you can bring may not be super exciting, but they could be millions of dollars.
Exactly.
So I know we have some extra time, but I would really like to ask the audience to ask questions because this is how a lot of learning takes place. If nobody is asking questions, I will ask questions for sure. But I want to allow everybody.
Sorry.
I'm
sorry. Yeah. Are we good?
Let me see.
Well, Mike had put something in the chat about finding agile and design thinking practices complementary, and you've talked quite a bit about the complementary processes and bringing them in. Maybe you can just say a little bit more about that because it's so important and it enriches your work.
Yeah, so I think at the big level, I think that, the creative process, there is a universal creative process. And that's why all of those have places when they are somewhat similar. And while I'm not a pro at agile, so Mike, if you want to bring your perspective, I would love to you to bring it. I really think that if you understand process well enough, you can look at whatever's in place, whether it's agile, lean thinking, or something else, and say, okay, given the challenges at stake, because some process might be better for certain things than other, like Six Sigma is great for, production improvement or thing like that. But whatever it is at stake, the process that they currently have, and say, is there elements of other processes or the tool that can bring it and kind of bring it within the process? So I'm not reinventing everything because that's overwhelming, but I'm like, doing this, but you're not really thinking about the users. So let's bring the user-centered concept within the process that you're using. And that's, the only thing we'll do. Or, as a tool that can be particularly useful to the challenge at stake. So that's really my philosophy because it's not realistic to bring a new process to an organization that already have a process.
Yep. Great, thank you.
So
Agreed.
what, Molly, you have a question? Mike?
Question. I was just saying that from a macro perspective, especially when people who are in design and people who are adopting agile ways of working in my context there was a little bit of a perceived holy war between the two, and we found that if you could come up with some really great, promising ideas with design thinking, you could be pretty confident in decomposing them, is the word we use, to story level epics. Chunks of value definition that you could actually then go into the prototype and test phases of design thinking, or in this case, um, I would say it's from possibility to predictability. So you want all of that user input first. You want all of the empathy mapped out into here's the traceability of value if we deliver it to what their sentiment was early on. Now, how can we build even better and better prototypes incrementally?
Yeah. And then one element that you kind of mentioning, and I mentioned before, is really important to have clear criteria, whatever it is, because too often people have kind of vaguely defined how success look like.
Yeah.
And you make decision based on not really being clear what success look like. So if it's really, and one of the idea that is like designers love constraints. Actually, you think they don't, but they do. Designing under constraint is much easier than designing without constraint. So think about criteria about constraint and take some time up front with the team and say, what is the criteria? And then things might change. So it's always good to revisit and maybe there's add new things. I mean, in this environment, everything changes. So what's true today might be different in 6 months, and that's totally okay. But trying to be very clear. So at least every time we converge, there is a clear alignment. Once again, it's breaking silos. How are we going to make decision? How are we seeing the business? I mean, there's another tool that is not a design thinking tool, but I use a lot is the business model canvas, which I find it to be a great tool for alignment because then everybody see all aspects of the business in the same place, whether the engineering pushing for some engineering perspective and the finance where it's like, but I need to make my finance and the sales like, I just need to sell enough. I don't care if we make enough money and all of that. So same thing is like being super clear in all those innovation and change is really important.
Amy?
I have a question. Helene, this is great. Thank you for sharing.
Oh.
I am curious about, so I'm familiar, I teach both CPS and sometimes design thinking, a little more CPS just because I'm more trained in it. But when you're working with a client and they don't have a preference for one or the other, like they don't already have a process in place, how do you make that decision of which one to teach them, or do you even care because they're so similar? Just curious, or even which one do you explain to them? I mean, a little bit of it is semantics, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
For me, they come one and the same because I kind of really mesh both of them.
Okay, cool.
So, I mean, I will usually use if everything's possible, and I will use a design thinking, but with a grounding into the understanding of creativity and principle of creativity, like the dynamic balance, like those kind of things. So it has that research-based understanding that I find really useful. And then if you look at my book, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to have the research grounded part of it and the very practical part of it because innovation, you can't talk about innovation, you have to do it. But it's important to have the grounding. And that's what, for me, what Foresight and CPS gave me is that grounding, is understanding that it's just not some concept, but there is a reason for those concepts.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to give you, Helen, send you a text, a message on the chat from Harry. You maybe want to look at that, but I want to make a comment as well. I think one of the reasons I teach creative thinking is because I believe in the humanizing factor of creativity. I help people to develop their potential, and that's an excellent way of sensing some fulfillment. And I'm sure that all of you will have experienced this in one way or another. But one of the things I like about design thinking, and I really want to emphasize, is this whole thing about empathy. Can you imagine if everybody was trained in just to become a bit more empathetic, just to listen to people a bit more, to understand people a bit more? That would help this nation develop on a different level. So I think that there has a lot to contribute to the quality of education, and that's where I'm teaching that here.
Yeah, listening is a universal skill that we don't do enough of, and is so useful, so important because that's really, and I would say, I think AI, I mean, we haven't gotten into that, but I think with AI, that listening, that understanding the human nuances is going to be even more important because a lot of things are going to be delegated to AI. And if we don't really understand those human nuances, we might miss some of the key elements of solutions.
Yeah. If you have any other questions, you can put in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. So we have these two ways to do it. So free flow right now.
Yeah, and I noticed in the chat box you put something about you were curious about design thinking and business model canvas and innovation. And as you're thinking about your question, I'd be glad to address it because I've been coaching at the High School of Business, specifically the business model canvas. And I like to teach to coach in these two ways. One is, as I say, it's a great tool for alignment. So all the functions can understand what are we trying to do with our business? Who are the customers, which is really something from design thinking, the customer segment, and what value are we bringing? So what value are we bringing to a customer? That is not a feature because customers don't buy features. They really don't care ultimately, but they care about how is it going to help them. And the other framework we use is a job to be done. How is this thing is going to help me, shop faster, put dinner on my table without being tired, things like that. That's what they care about, not the feature. But the other way that I like to use it is an innovation tool because it's one way to prototype your ideas and you can say, okay, this is 3 ways that our business is this today, but it could be this or this or this tomorrow. And let's look at it and see if we start, working with a new partner. How is that going to change how we communicate with our users? How is it going to affect our financial model? If we have a new segment, how is it going to change other elements of our business? So in that sense, it's a way to prototype in the sense that it gives you a vision of what your business can be, and then you can also get feedback on it, obviously.
Thank you. Molly, you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Helene.
You muted yourself.
Uh-oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So Helene, I know you recently transitioned to a group consulting or consulting within a group with a group of other consultants, but most of your work previously has been individual consulting. So I'd be curious to hear how those two experiences compare and why you might gravitate towards one or the other.
Well, so I'm a little new to fully answer, but so I've been a solo consultant for over 20 years. And over time, there's two things. One, I think it's harder to be a solo consultant than it used to be 20 years ago. I think organizations want to hire name and groups and things like that. The second part is it's a little lonely. It was great because I raised my 3 kids and I had a lot of flexibility, but it's also feel like I miss connection. And the third element is if you flip it and look at being user-centered, from a client perspective, they have a bunch of challenges. And finding a bunch of consultants to address each challenge is not necessarily the easiest way for them. But talking to a consultant group that have different capabilities and can say, well, this is your problem. We'll put a team of consultants to solve that problem, regardless of it's only innovation or if it's innovation and finance or if it's is a better option. So I think from a user-centered perspective, I'm glad to be able to be part of a team when we can offer a breadth of solution to our clients.
I'm glad you're enjoying the new position. That's good.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you brought up these jobs to be done. So I want to make a reference to that, to Anthony Ulwick and all the work he has done in this area, how to measure the benefits that people get. Because that's one of the critical things about putting value to the customer in a measurable format.
Yes. Yes.
So
it's helpful because it's once again really focusing on the users. It's part of the same focus. It's like,
yes,
people, all of us have a job to be done as a parent, as a worker, as a community member, and all of that. But being clear on that, and so the solution is addressing that, rather than addressing something else, is really powerful.
So one of the things I'm thinking of, anybody can interrupt me, by the way, if you have a question, but is this, how can you acquire design thinking mindset? What is one thing that I can start doing now to start thinking in terms of design thinking?
Yes, so I thought about the question, and I'm going to put the challenge back to this audience. I'm going to give you a minute, and I write you something in the chat box about what you think you might start from what we share about today. Maybe one thing that you want to start thinking about doing, and then I can give you some answers. But I think you are the audience, so you might all have different answers. And so, if you want to take a minute to do that, and just share in the chat box.
So even as people write, I'm going to share a link for people.
So I'm going to start reading, but keep putting stuff in the chat box, because that's probably all the answers I would have given you. So I'm glad it's coming from you instead. The act of prototyping, think about how the people feel, the reason they feel that way, the idea of breaking silos. I want to talk about the idea of designing for the extreme. Great. So I know we have only a few minutes left, so I just wanted to share a couple of ways to connect with me, and then I want to give Sue the last word, of course. Hector, you want to talk about your link?
Yes, well, I got to know someone who's done some research in design thinking mindset from Italy, and they have a tool. And then for anyone who wants to go there and try it out, that's something for free. If anyone wants the article, you can always send it to me. Send me a request. I can send you the article. His name is Matteo Vignola.
Okay, and let me see if I can go back to. Well, I need to go back. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, next steps. If you want to get those slides, so you can use that QR code and get the slides, or you can just take a picture, and then this is a link to to download those slides. So I'll leave it for a second. If you need more time, let us know. If not, I move on to the next one. If you want to keep in touch, you can link. Same thing. I like to use QR code. That's a very user-friendly thing I found. So using more and more. You can connect on LinkedIn, take a picture of it, or find me on LinkedIn. You can check my website, and I have a mostly bi-monthly innovation newsletter. It's not necessarily twice a month, but that's the intent. If you want to check the book, it's see what you think and let me know. It's available on Kindle and then the printout version. The printout version is better, but the Kindle is more user-friendly. It's easier, but there's a lot of each chapter has some practices and visual and things like that. So it's visual thinking is actually a really important element of design thinking. So I try to include it in my book. Every chapter is color-coded. So I try to really use a lot of that. And then if you're curious, I've been on many podcasts and articles about innovation teams. So you can check my blog. And Sue, this is all yours.
Wow, just fabulous. I can't thank the two of you enough. The art of questioning, the practitioner with such expertise through a scholarly lens, that just warms my heart for sure. And so and as alumni, it just makes for a wonderful session. And so I wanted to say to everybody, thank you for attending the mini C. The Center for Applied Imagination, the Department of Creativity and Change Leadership, thanks you for coming. And there are lots of ways to stay connected. So I put a few things here. And also we have the big Creativity Expert Exchange Conference coming up. So do try to join us. And it was great to see really a lot of people from a lot of different organizations here. And please come again. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a
Thank
great
you. Bye.
Thank you all.